Are really excited. Got it. Really excited today to have a very different perspective, I think, on some of what we've been talking about for the last couple of months. Has really been more about different contexts where preceptors are taking students and supporting students in their learning. It's been a really wild ride in COVID. And we found ourselves relying on private practice dietitians a lot more, I think, than we ever thought we would. And along that process, we've discovered, boy, they really know some stuff, a lot of stuff that maybe we hadn't thought about and maybe we should be thinking more about. So I'm really excited to have three people today who are going to talk about precepting in private practice. And we've called it Beyond the Blog because we know that sometimes students end up doing a lot of blog posts, but we're going to get some great ideas for alternative things, ways you can actually, have a win-win for you and your student. So I just like to take a minute to introduce our three speakers. First, we have Krista Kolajesic, and she's a registered dietitian and the founder of the Dietitian Success Center, which is an online learning platform designed to make it easier for dietitians and dietetic students to build their confidence and expertise in both nutrition and entrepreneurship. She also works one-to-one with dietitians to help them start and grow meaningful, fulfilling businesses. With the Dietitian Success Center, her mission has been to provide education and support to fellow dietitians and dietitians-to-be to pursue their entrepreneurship dreams and creative passions. Krista is also an avid baker, reader, and a triathlete. Second, we have Rebecca Harris up, and she is just finishing up her master's in nutrition communications from University X, renaming in process. And she is a private practice dietitian specializing in nutrition for those with ADHD. She is the owner of the Nutrition Junkie, where she helps ADHDers optimize their health and time in the kitchen. And in her free time, you can find her hiking with her dog, baking, and co-hosting the true crime podcast, Unsavory. She's a former criminologist. And finally, Miranda Galati, who is also a master's in health communications graduate, is a second-year dietitian with a background in corporate marketing and consulting. She's the owner of Real Life Nutritionists, a virtual private practice and online community sharing evidence-based nutrition information to help women find balance with food. Thank you so much, all three of you. And I'm going to turn it over to Krista.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Angela. I'm just going to quickly share my screen here. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Just give me a thumbs up in the perfect. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. It's always such an awesome opportunity to get the chance to chat with more dietitians. I love being able to take some time away from my day-to-day to do some fun stuff like this. So just a little bit about me. So as Angela had mentioned, my name is Krista Kolajesic. I'm a fellow dietitian. I did my Master's of Public Health at the University of Toronto, and this year I'm finishing up my MBA at the University of Guelph. And so today I'm excited to sort of speak a little bit from more the preceptor perspective when it comes to taking on students in business, in entrepreneurship, in private practice, whatever you call it. In terms of my past dietetic experience, after graduating, I worked as a retail dietitian for a while. And then I switched over to working in the food industry before actually starting my own business, which is Dietitian Success Center. And so in terms of my experience working with students, when I was in food industry, so we had quite a large dietitian or dietetic intern program. We would take about 20 or so students a year, just with the two dietitians, myself and another dietitian. So we would often have one or two students at the same time for anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks typically. And so my role was sort of to coordinate that with the university, with the student, to make sure the student was fully onboarded, to come up with the student projects, all of that good stuff. So that gave me a really good perspective in terms of just implementing seamless student processes. And then since since starting Dietitian Success Center, which is an online learning platform for dietitians, I've also had the opportunity to take on students in more of an entrepreneurship role as well. And so I'm sort of going to be speaking from both of those lenses today. And just to share right from the get-go too, if you're interested, I have a couple of free resources that might be helpful for you in terms of your practice, that you can absolutely feel free to download if you just head over to dietitiansuccesscenter.com and then just do /freebie. There's a nutrition client resource kit. So a collection of 5 handouts you can feel free to just take and use with your clients. And then also a business planning workbook as well, if you find that helpful for you. Okay, so in terms of the learning objectives, just for my little session here, so in terms of discussing how to set students up for success in private practice, I'm going to walk you through my onboarding practice for students and just sort of my student process that I've refined over time. I'll give you 3 examples of projects that I've done with students in my own business that I think can really be universally applied regardless of the type of business that you have. And I'll walk you through sort of the process that I used, the step-by-step process for what that project actually looks like so that you can go ahead and start implementing it. So giving you a little bit of that behind the scenes. And then I'll talk a little bit at the end about evaluating competency and just what that looks like, what characteristics I look for to assess competency in more of an entrepreneurship or a business setting, since I know sometimes it can be a little bit challenging since it's typically a little bit less conventional. So I just want to say a few words about taking on students in private practice or business just before I get into the onboarding process and my project examples. I just think taking on students in private practice is such an amazing opportunity to leverage individual strengths, right? Whenever we're talking about hiring in a business setting, they always say hire for your weaknesses, right? Find people who can bring strengths to the table that you don't necessarily have yourself. And I think that this is the same can be applied to taking on interns or taking on students. Each student comes to the table with their own unique set of skills, their own unique set of strengths. And so it's such an amazing opportunity to be able to leverage those for your own business. And so in terms of how we're thinking about taking on students, I know oftentimes, especially in business, because there's so much going on, right? We have so much happening in our day-to-day. There's the to-do list is ever expanding. But I would challenge you to think about taking on a student as more of an investment in growth versus an expense on your time. And so what I would suggest doing, and this is always what I do before I take on any student, is I take a little bit of time to reflect on what are some of the things that I have been wanting to do in my business, but I haven't had the time. Because again, this is such an incredible opportunity to leverage someone else's strengths, someone else's skills to be able to do something new and different in your business and to be able to expand and grow your business. And also just developing your management skills as well. So depending on where you're at in your practice, perhaps you've made your first hire, maybe you haven't made your first hire yet. But this is such an amazing opportunity to really start developing those management skills that become so important as you start thinking about growing your team and taking on additional help in your practice. So just to speak a little bit about what it looks like to be a student with Dietitian Success Center. So as I've described with Dietitian Success Center, it is an online learning platform for dietitians. So I'm not working with clients one-on-one in a traditional nutrition counseling capacity. So students that come to DSC are not doing that either. It's very much a project-based placement. It's incredibly self-directed and entirely virtual. And there's no one-on-one client interaction because I'm not working with clients one-on-one conventionally as a dietitian. There's a very heavy emphasis on communications, marketing, and management. And again, at the end, I'll speak a little bit more specifically to just competencies and which competencies I find tend to fit for the different projects. But again, the projects that I'm going to share can be universally applied, regardless of whether you are working one-on-one with clients or whatever your business actually looks like. Now, I am also very flexible with my students too, and I'm going to speak a little bit to this in more detail. But I think what's really cool about having your own business and taking on students is that you have the opportunity to really build out a process that you feel like works best for you and works best for your students. So I'm very flexible with my students because I want to give them a realistic perspective of what it actually looks like to be a business owner. And I want to use it as an opportunity for them to be able to develop their skills in just independent working, in self-direction, and in accountability as well. And so I think it's a great opportunity to be able to do that. So I just want to chat through onboarding and how I sort of onboard students. This is a process that we really refined and developed when I was working in food industry, and then I've sort of taken it and adapted it to private practice. And so feel free to utilize this system as well if you find it helpful for you in your practice. The very first thing that I do whenever I take on any student is on the very first day, I book a 90-minute onboarding Zoom meeting with that student first thing in the morning. And I use this as a real opportunity to just give them a lay of the land. So I always start by describing exactly what I do in my business and what Dietitian Success Center is. I think we can't make assumptions just because we've worked in business for a while or just because we've done private practice for a while. We just cannot make assumptions that a student actually understands what that means or understands what that looks like. So I start with just describing what I do. And then I take the student through I take them through the work that I do, the projects that I do, processes that I have, the systems that I have. And then together we actually develop what I call a work plan. This is something that has been hugely beneficial. So I would highly suggest implementing this if you haven't already done so in your own practice. A work plan is just simply a simple Google Doc or a Word doc where we have 4 columns on the document. We have the project, we have the deliverables, we have the due dates, and then we have the competencies. And so before I meet with the student, I will go in and I'll write in their projects. So what are they going to be working on while we are during their placement together? And then I also write in the deliverables as well. So when I say deliverables, I mean, what are some of those key things that are going to be due at different points in the process? So for example, let's just say we're talking about the blog post at the very beginning, if that's something you're getting your students to do. Is there going to be an expectation for them to publish a rough draft? And if so, when is that going to be due? When is the final draft going to be due? What is that going to look like? Is there going to be corresponding marketing materials like Instagram posts or whatever to go with the blog post? When is that going to be due? And so I go through and I populate those 3 columns. And then after going through that with the student, I then get the student to go through their competency record and really start to copy and paste some of the different competencies that they feel like they're going to meet with each one of the projects. That way they stay accountable to making sure that they're not missing anything. There's no clear gaps. And if there are clear gaps, then we can together decide on a project that will work for the student. And then telling them exactly what your expectations are and what you're looking for is really important. So setting expectations up front is essential, and I'll talk about that in a little bit on the next slide. And then from there, it's very self-directed. Essentially, at that point, the student has their projects. And then what I do is I set up, just depending on the duration of the placement, either weekly or bi-weekly recurring touch points It's a 30-minute meeting for us to chat, discuss, for them to give me any updates on their projects, for me to help if they need any troubleshooting. And that's typically how the process works. So I just want to speak to you a little bit about expectations before I get into the specific projects. I do think setting expectations right up front is essential to having an awesome student-preceptor relationship. We just can't make assumptions that somebody has the same expectations as you do. And so, if you have a project that you want a student to work on and you're not clear about the expectations and they do it in a different way, we can't be upset that they did it in a different way because we weren't clear with our expectations. And so this is a really important piece to the process. And so just a couple things that I would consider as you're setting expectations with your students. Thinking about just some of those day-to-day processes. So are there specific days that they are expected to be working versus maybe their placement isn't full-time, so maybe they're not working every single day, but do they have a start and an end time, or is it a little bit fluid, a little bit flexible? What's the expectation in terms of responding after hours? So typically this is like, you don't have to respond after hours. That's not the expectation. And so just making sure you're very clear on that, because otherwise I think often, students will feel like they need to respond really quickly if you send them an email when it's like, no, it's fine. Next business day works. How long it's going to take you to get back to them. I know for me, sometimes it takes a little bit of time. I'm not always immediate with my email responses. And so I just need to make sure and be clear about that off the bat, just so they know. And then what's your management style? Are you a bit more of a macro manager? Are you a bit more of a micro manager? Are you a bit more hands off? What does that look like? And I think here too, just remembering you don't need to do things the way your preceptors did it. If you feel like there's a different system and a different process that will work for you and will work for the student, then go for it. Feel free to implement that. Decide how you want to manage that relationship. Okay, so I want to walk you through 3 project examples, which I have done a couple times with students and have been great projects in terms of helping to expand and improve my processes, and then also just hitting on a lot of the competencies. So the very first one that I want to talk about is actually incorporation of online learning into your business. Now, don't be intimidated by this. I think that, we're really online learning is becoming more of a hot topic in terms of dietetic practice. And so thinking about how can we start to incorporate online learning into our practice and have students help with this process. So when it comes to online learning and incorporating that into our practice, I always like to say that there's really 3 different ways that we can do this. We can actually create an online course in our business. We can create a course on our process, our methodology, what we teach to our clients, and we can actually sell that as a standalone product. We can also take some of the content that we teach our clients repetitively and turn that into something automated. So if you find that there's the content that you're teaching over and over and over again, because I know that there is, because we've all been there, right? Maybe you find that you're teaching label reading over and over and over again to every single one of your clients. Well, is there an opportunity to actually be able to automate that, to turn that into a video module that a client can watch in between sessions? And so that when you guys actually meet on Zoom or wherever you're meeting, virtually or in person, you can spend more time on action planning and goal setting and troubleshooting, and you don't have to do as much of that really repetitive client education. So that I always encourage dietitians to think about how you can actually start to incorporate some of that automation into your practice, because again, it's just such a fantastic time saver. It's a great way to build efficiencies into your business. And so this is absolutely something that a student can help with. They can do their research right off the bat around, what are some of the best practices for online learning, and then taking those best practices and incorporating those into creation of a learning module. They're also going to be refining a lot of their communication techniques as well, and communication skills when it comes to just audio, visual, written, verbal, using technology in practice. There's so many different competencies that this one project would be able to hit on. And so typically what this looks like in terms of the actual step-by-step process, what I would have a student do is they would start by, number one, researching best practices for online learning and sort of putting that into a little bit of a review. And then taking that information and also reviewing with them, what is the content that you want them to include? What is the content that you teach to your clients, and how do you teach it to your clients? And then I would have them to create an outline of the content, probably just bullet points in a Google Doc or in a Word document. You would review that to make sure that you're both on the same page. And then I would have them create the slides for the online learning module I use Canva, you could use PowerPoint, whatever you want. So exactly like what I'm doing right now with my slides in the background. And then I would have them create speaking notes as well that I can then use when I go to record the online learning module. So that's project idea number one. Also feel free to just post in the chat if you do have any questions about any of the things that I'm going through. I'm happy to answer I know we're doing a little bit of Q&A at the end, but I'm happy to answer as I'm walking through as well. Project idea number two, freelance writing. So I used to do a lot more freelancing in my, when I first started my business. So companies would actually hire me to write content for them, write articles for them, whatever that might look like. And so I actually used this as a really awesome opportunity for a student project. So I almost set up a little bit of like a mock freelancing project for them in order to give them a little bit of a perspective in terms of what that side of business can actually look like, because more and more dietitians are incorporating different income streams or different revenue streams in their businesses. So they might see some clients one-on-one, but then they might also do a little bit of freelance or contract work. And so I wanted to make sure that the student felt comfortable with that if they were going into practice or into entrepreneurship or business themselves. And so what I actually did for this project is I found a previous freelance job posting that I had actually pitched for, I had actually applied to. So I found a previous freelance job posting. I then took the student through some best practices when it comes to actually pitching your services to a client. I had the student write out a mock pitch. So they took those learnings and they actually wrote their own pitch. And then I took the project specifications from when I actually did the freelance project. So, what was the topic? What was the word count, etc. And I had the student actually write a mock article. And then I provided a review based on my professional judgment. And so it really gave them an opportunity to see the entire process of freelancing and what that actually looked like. So that was a really fun project as well for the student, because it gave them sort of a little bit of a different perspective. And it gave us an opportunity to talk about some of those more business skills around pitching, around pricing, around how do we write for an audience that isn't a isn't a medical audience or isn't a dietitian audience. How do we actually write in really simplistic, non-jargon language? So this one was really fun. And then lastly, project idea number 3, which, if you I think it's a really fun one. And I don't necessarily feel like you need to actually have your own podcast, because I know a lot of us don't have our own podcasts. But you don't necessarily have to have your own podcast in order to do this type of a project. But I actually had a student, Miranda, who is going to be speaking in a few minutes. She actually wrote and recorded her very own podcast episode, which was really, really cool. So this is an awesome opportunity to be able to refine skills in public speaking, in communication skills, so written, verbal, using modern technology in practice, and then research skills as well. So in terms of the process that we took, she went through and she listened to some of my past podcast episodes. So the podcast is called the Dietitian Success Podcast. You can actually go and just search Miranda in that podcast, and you can see the podcast that she did. So she listened to previous episodes so that she really understood what the process was like, what my podcast was like. And then I had her actually write out an outline, including the introduction, including the key points, including the outro. And then I actually had her record it as well. So she did the entire process. And now she has a podcast recording that is out there in the universe for people to be able to hear, which is really fun. And then she also helped with some of the corresponding social media content that went out with that podcast episode. So this was a really fun process. But, if you don't have your own podcast, even thinking about how can you get a student to help you maybe pitch yourself to other podcasts. Or if you have a podcast recording coming up with somebody else, can they help you come up with questions or write out responses to questions? What might that look like? Okay, so now just in terms really quickly of assessing competency, I really feel like we can touch on each one of the domains with these projects that we're working on. In terms of professional practice, I think every one of these projects gives us an opportunity to utilize the whole idea of systematic approaches to decision-making, of managing time and workload effectively with the work plan, using technology in practice. That's coming up a lot. Of course, communication and collaboration. I think we can pretty much touch on almost every single competency within that domain. If you are seeing clients one-on-one and you actually want to have your students work with you when you do your client sessions, then absolutely you can incorporate some of the nutrition care competencies. I really feel like the online learning module project is a great one for population public health, because it gives them an opportunity to do that assessment of needs, to come up with a plan, to come up with a project plan, to actually implement, and then to even add an evaluation component at the end, just depending on how long the placement is. And then definitely management as well. So coming up with goals and objectives for a project, again, with that work plan, that project management where the student is responsible for the deliverables and ensuring that they're meeting deliverables and that they have those corresponding competencies to match the deliverables. And then in terms of just characteristics or traits that I look for when it comes to assessing competency, since it is a little bit different in a business setting or a private practice versus a hospital, I really look for those skills that are going to make somebody successful in an entrepreneurship or business setting. Things like self-direction, things like meeting deadlines, things like communication skills. That's come up over and over and over again. And then the last one too is recognition of limits, right? When is the time when the student actually brings me in and asks me for that support or for that assistance? Are they able to recognize their limitations appropriately? All right, so that's it for me. I hope that you enjoyed that. Please feel free to get in touch if you ever have any questions for me. More than happy to chat or to answer any of your questions. And I think that we'll save questions to the end during the panel. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Krista. I appreciate that. I think we're going to move on to Rebecca now. So Rebecca, are you okay? Okay, great.
Yes, I am good to go. And just a heads up, sometimes my Wi-Fi gets a little bit dodgy. So if I turn off my video, that's why. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, can you see it? Yeah, perfect. Great. So I'm Rebecca, and I recently completed the MHSC program, and I launched my business full-time in January. So I focus mainly on nutrition for those with ADHD, as Angela mentioned. So I see clients one-on-one. I create blog content and other online content, including doing some like brand work all through my brand, The Nutrition Junkie. And I took a bit more of like a project-based approach. I think Miranda did as well, where we're just going to talk a little bit about our experience as students, but also as new dietitians and how we plan to take on students. So I didn't actually have any like traditional private practice placements, but I was with a dietitian business owner and had some experiences that would be similar to those in like those more traditional private practice positions or roles. But with one specific dietitian, I was involved in some like pretty interesting projects, including some recipe testing and food photography. So she had basically already developed a recipe and blog post, and I essentially made sure that it turned out as it was intended to, and took process photos that ultimately like accompanied her blog post. So I was able to tailor like at least a handful of those like food service management competencies to this experience, since technically it is a form of food project management. So for instance, I identified like the resources that I needed. I modified the recipe since some changes were needed. And then I contributed to like the food production for individuals who were following the recipe at home. So we got like a bit creative with this in terms of how it would kind of relate to food service and food management. But it was a really fun project. And I feel like I learned some like pretty interesting lessons about recipe development and whatnot. And it did give me some good insight just into like the life of a successful food blogger. And then another thing that I worked on during my time as a student was a social media strategy. So I pulled together different information on these recent Pinterest updates. And I then came up with a strategy on how this dietitian could kind of leverage this platform and the new features to spread her nutrition message and her nutrition content. And then I presented my findings back to the team. And this project was extremely interesting personally, because I actually tested out some of the strategies on my own blog content. So I had and have a blog. And those pieces of content have actually become like my main traffic drivers to my website, which is really interesting. But I also was able to meet some management competencies, like specifically like the manage program and project competencies, since I contributed to a marketing plan and the training of the staff, or like staff development, since I basically summarized and presented my findings. But this was so incredibly valuable because it showed me like a new platform that I wasn't really familiar with before, but it also showed me how to use it to get my own nutrition content out there. And then another experience of note was creating YouTube scripts. And I feel like you all will be able to decipher who this dietitian was, who I did this with. But basically learning to communicate information using video content, it's so much different than what you would do with written content, or even just like verbal, just speaking content like podcasting and stuff like that, because you really have to kind of consider the visuals and stuff as you're going. And I just found this so rewarding because I got to see the final videos and all of the comments that were on it and the feedback. And I found it very rewarding to kind of see that project through to completion. And I also hit basically all of the communication competencies doing this project as well. And a few big takeaways for me as a student on like what I found the most rewarding, but also where I learned the most throughout all of my placements, was when I was able to see a project through from start to finish, and essentially all of the processes and potential issues that kind of came up along with it. Found that incredibly valuable, as well as gaining access to the back end of platforms. And I feel like this seems so small, but just being able to see the back end of things like somebody's WordPress or social media platforms, or just even ways that other dietitians in private practice organize themselves, was just so incredibly important. And I feel like I use a lot of those strategies now, now that I'm doing the work myself. So that was incredible. And then kind of moving on to my experience and plans as a private practice dietitian. So I have yet to take on any interns myself since I just started my business in January. But I do have a nutrition student volunteering with me. And I think having just been a student myself has really pushed me to give her like a lot of autonomy in what she wants to do, within the realm of like what I need done. But that was really important to me, is just kind of tailoring the experience to the student and their interests. So prior to working together, I drafted up a list of projects that I hadn't started yet, as well as some areas where there would be flexibility to kind of tailor it to different interests. And basically this volunteer, she selected a few projects from that list to start. And the first was to do some digging into the restrictions, legalities, and options around micronutrient blood testing. And so because I was just starting up my business at this point, this was something I really wanted to get some information on to see how I could do that as a private practice dietitian, if I could do that, and how it would get done. So I had her pull that together and give me a mini presentation on her findings. And while she isn't currently working on her competencies, like she's not in placement, she was identifying things like provincial and federal restrictions and legislation, while also helping to enhance dietetic practice. So she was working on many of the competencies under the realm of professional practice. And then I feel like these business development activities, I think they can be very valuable to students who are interested in private practice, even if not, because I honestly wish that I had had some more experiences like these throughout my placements, even just looking into different platforms. Like if somebody's thinking of moving to a new platform or using a different app for clients or something like that, even having the experience of just like knowing what's out there, I feel like could be really good. So my volunteer is also currently working on a blog post for me, but I tried to spruce up this experience a bit. So she chose the topic, and I gave her basically an SEO crash course on how to optimize web content. So we're now working together with this piece of content to basically just create something that will hopefully get a lot of visibility online. And I feel like those who know me know that I'm very passionate about SEO, so search engine optimization. And I think it's really important to provide like future dietitians with skills like these to gain exposure on their own content and their own nutrition messaging. And I know that this session is called Beyond the Blog, but blog content can be great in meeting communication and population health competencies. But I think providing value in other ways is also important, or like elevating the experience in some way, since I feel like a lot of the dietetic programs already have a huge focus on research and writing. So they may not need to develop their skills much more in those areas, but in marketing and just getting your content onto like into new ears or new eyes or what have you could be very, very valuable. And then another example for me personally, for what I plan on having students do in the future, would be teaching students how to select a food-related keyword that has potential to rank online. So similar to a blog post, except have them develop a recipe around that specific keyword. So There you're kind of touching on those food management competencies, but then also teaching them a skill on web optimization. And I know that the food management area is where a lot of, at least like my peers, kind of struggled to get experience. So I feel like that could be a really good example. And then some other projects that I have lined up for students include help with my upcoming ADHD nutrition course and resource development, which again can target the area of like population health. And another area that I'm considering is communication and content management for brand work. And this is something I'm like really considering because I think it could be fun for a student if they were interested in this type of work. Because I think that learning how to manage brand relations within the food industry can be a huge like component to a dietitian's business, depending on how it's structured. And this could like tick off a lot of boxes under a lot of the areas of practice, but it could also kind of show a student how to work with brands, what a fair rate is for a dietitian to do work, and kind of like seeing one of those projects from start to finish in terms of like how you generate an idea and present it to the company and take the feedback and create something of value from that. But yeah, so basically to sum it up, I feel like throughout my own experience as a student and now a dietitian, I've realized that you can get very creative with the IC depths and provide value in different ways beyond blog research and writing, by understanding your students' interests, but also just, again, getting kind of creative with your projects and things you need done.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Very interesting to see both perspectives, and I appreciate that. Now we have our last speaker, Miranda. I'm just going to see that she's okay.
I'm here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Miranda.
Yes, that's my slide, Becca. Oh, no, not that one. Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So, I mean, obviously I align so much with what Krista and Becca have both described already, so I won't be too redundant in my presentation here. A little bit of background on me to understand the perspective that I'm bringing to the table. So this, I'm a second career dietitian. So my career started in the marketing and consulting world, and then I went back to school to become a dietitian. And the reason why I kind of bring that up is because I think it brought me an interesting perspective as a student. As I'm sure Krista, one of my preceptors can attest to, I was like very concerned about being bored in placements, and I was really lucky with my preceptors that didn't happen, and I did get a lot of value out of them, which was awesome. So that's kind of the perspective that I'm bringing to the table when I'm talking about these things today. I'm kind of thinking about like how we can improve the experience for the student, because I think Krista did a really great job covering how to really make it more valuable for you as a preceptor. So I was in my master's program doing the internship rotations last year, and then now this year I'm running my own practice and business. I have not precepted an intern yet, but I do have many different arms in my business where I feel like there could be some opportunity to do so. So thoughts as a student, I have thoughts about projects, and I also have thoughts around, you know, the processes around things and the experiences I had that were really positive and that I enjoyed as a student, and especially as a mature student, as I said. So one thing that I really loved around a bunch of my preceptors in less traditional practice was that they took the time at the beginning of placements to really understand my career goals and what it was that I was looking to accomplish after internships were over. And I felt like that discussion really made me feel that I was a valuable member of the team, and that I was there not just to contribute to projects and do some things for their practice, but they really cared about helping me learn and helping me accomplish the things that I wanted to accomplish once the internship rotations were done. Oh, sorry, I'm just checking in the chat there. People aren't seeing the slides.
Sorry, give me one sec. I'll see.
No worries. I can see them strangely, so that's interesting. Oh. Sorry, guys. Becca and I are working together.
I think the confusion is you guys use the same template. It's actually a different slide.
Oh,
okay, yeah.
Okay, well, hopefully the slides really aren't super important anyways. Hopefully I'm explaining this well enough if you can't see them, but sorry for the confusion there. So something else that I really appreciated is the autonomy that I was given by a lot of my preceptors. And what I mean by that is not only were they in situations where it was appropriate, I was kind of given the freedom to do the work when I wanted to do it, in a way that I wanted to do it, in a way that made sense for my schedule. But I was also given some autonomy in the types of topics I was doing on these projects. And so rather than just assigning me on a blog post on a specific topic and telling me to go on my way, I actually got to think about topics that I wanted to learn more about that would be appropriate for their business, and then go on to research and write on that particular topic. And honestly, as a student, that was so beneficial to me because there were topics where I felt like I had some knowledge gaps. And so being able to have an opportunity to dig into the research a little bit more on those specific topics was so awesome. And then clear vision and communication of, what the internship would look like was something that I really appreciated. So as Krista mentioned, I was, one of my placements was with her. And so I had a chance to experience that work plan as a student. And I loved it because what it meant is at the beginning of the placement, I knew exactly what projects were coming up and I could kind of work through things in my own time. And I also knew that we were really clear on our expectations with one another. So that was really awesome too. Some projects that I really enjoyed doing was podcasting, as Krista mentioned again, writing the script and being able to present the podcast was honestly just really fun and a really interesting experience that was a totally different format than what I was used to doing. Developing client resources. So that was like written material or more visual summary handouts and stuff like that. That was really awesome. In another placement, I had a chance to host live cooking classes, which I thought was so much fun too. And again, different than the type of stuff that I was used to doing in my past career or with the business that I'd started on the side. I also had the opportunity to shadow client sessions virtually, which of course I found so valuable. And also I had some opportunity to attend learning events and, webinars and stuff like that, which was an awesome experience as well. Overall, something that I really appreciated as a student was the variety and the amount of things that I was doing and not having to spend my day always doing the exact same thing or the exact same project. So shifting from my perspective as a student now to my perspective as a dietitian, I want to talk a little bit about where I think there's more opportunity to improve the student experience, both in terms of processes and projects. So the first thing that I really want to make note of, having been through the internship recently and now having my own practice, is I think there's opportunity to maybe involve students more in the processes and systems of the business. And what I mean by that is, rather than treating a student purely like a contractor who's doing projects for you, really helping them get involved in the project from start to finish and understanding all the processes that take place in producing that particular project so they can really get more insight into what it means to run a business and run a practice and really what these projects involve from start to finish. So a really good example of that, I think, is blog posts, because I don't think there's anything wrong with blog posts being a part of the student experience. But, rather than just assigning someone a topic and telling them to write a blog post, allow them to go and look up topics that are interesting to them, do some keyword research, as Becca mentioned, do the research in different databases, write it, and then maybe even have a look at the performance later on if the length of the internship allows. I think that can be really, really beneficial, especially when you involve students in different types of projects that involve different platforms. That way they can have even more exposure to the types of things that you're doing and the types of systems that you're utilizing. Something that I think is really important, and I wasn't always granted this luxury with preceptors, is asking students about their environment and their capacity. So for example, if you're asking a student to run a live cooking class, really make sure they're comfortable doing so. I think sometimes as preceptors, we forget what it might be like sharing a kitchen or, if a student's living with parents or if they don't have the money to buy ingredients for something. So while I think those projects are so much fun and can bring so much value to a student, I think it's also important to be cognizant of their environment and their resources before, obligating them to do something of that nature. And the last thing I wrote here in terms of kind of general thoughts on how to improve things is maybe giving students a chance to participate in some formal training. So for example, in my business, I have a lot of different arms of the business, right? I serve clients in virtual group programs and courses. I run various social media platforms. I have a website that I'm working to optimize. So rather than just assigning students projects on those different platforms, I think it would be really great if a student expresses the interest to help them better learn how to be successful on those platforms. So for example, if a student really loves Instagram, giving them a little 1-hour Instagram 101 training and teaching them the ropes so that they can utilize it for themselves further on beyond just the project work. So that's something that I would have loved as a student to experience a little bit more. And I think now that I'm a dietitian, I can see the potential there. And then ideas for projects where we can get students more involved. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong with blog posts. I think that's a really nice way to involve students, and it helps flex the writing muscle in a more sometimes casual tone than we're used to in school. So I think blogs are awesome, but I think there's definitely opportunity beyond them. Some other thoughts that I had were getting students to maybe create video modules. So as I said, I have courses and group programs. So if they have the interest, actually going ahead and doing the research and compiling slides for a video module. And if the student expressed the interest, I might even have them record one if they were comfortable having that exist in one of my programs or courses. I think that could be really fun. Client resources, again, I think that's super fun. And I think there's a lot of variety that students can do with client resources. So yes, it can be a summary handout or a list of food ideas, but also maybe like journal prompts and more creative things. And again, you can give the student some autonomy to decide what types of things they might like to do there. Instagram lives and takeovers, I think could be a really fun thing for students. I know we're used to assigning students Instagram posts and reels and stuff, which I think is awesome too, but helping them do less conventional types of projects on Instagram or TikTok could be helpful as well. I also had the thought of like a TikTok series, so they can think about the series and what they want to do and all the different videos they want to do in the series, and give them a chance to research and action on that. And again, maybe also give them a chance to look at the analytics and do a bit of a post-mortem and evaluate how things went after they had the chance to publish things. Another thought with blogs is a video blog. So you could have a student write a blog post and they can make an accompanying video that sits on your website. And again, just gives them an opportunity to present things in a little bit of a different format. And then my last thought for projects was, what about like an email newsletter? That's something I do as part of my business. I think students could learn a lot having exposure to email marketing platforms. And again, writing, yes, but in a little bit of a different way with a little bit of a different goal in mind. So those are kind of my thoughts. I had a great positive experience as an intern. I was really grateful to have some unconventional opportunities, and I do think there's so much opportunity for students in the private practice world. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Miranda. That was really, really interesting. I appreciate all of your insights today, all three of you. We only have a few minutes left, but I just want to open the floor to some questions if anyone has any. I did notice a comment from Kath about students feeling respected, still commenting that they don't feel respected or valued in their practicum. And I think, Miranda, actually, you talked about, just recognizing that sometimes they may not have the money for things. And that's something that's come up for me recently with students, that assumption that they have subscriptions to things, that they have, extra money to do these things. Maybe that's something to do with feeling respected as well. But I don't know if anyone else has any comments on that or any questions.
I have another thought on that as well. Something that I really appreciated in the work that I did as a student was my preceptors always gave me credit where credit was due. So, if I wrote something, my name was there. If I produced something, my name was there, which I thought, it seems like such a small thing, but it really did go a long way to make me feel appreciated and valued.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I think we have to remember that students are actually building their own resumes, right? While they're going through this as well. So it's important to get credit. And Amy has said it's important to include students in team meetings and planning. I actually really like what both of you were saying, all three of you were saying about including students early on in the process, getting them involved with some of the systems and processes, because I think they really do want to feel that they're contributing to the business, but understanding, it's the give and take, is understanding your business. If I want to actually start one myself, I'm here, I have an opportunity to learn from an expert. And I think that's really appreciated. And certainly something that I hear from students a lot is that even that one-on-one time with you set up time for projects and you check in, but you also, set up some time for learning, some actual, students want to know how you did this, and what you do on a regular basis. And that's really, really valuable. I think they appreciate that.
Angie, I had my hand up and then I took it down and
Oh.
now I'm not sure. But anyway, I wanted to add to what you said, Miranda. It's not just a nice thing for people to include your name. It's their responsibility to do that, because otherwise they're stealing your intellectual property. And, that's not only not cool, it's illegal. So I think putting, I was sad. I mean, I wrote that. I just went, I cannot believe all this. Like, I cannot believe there are still dietitians out there who, and I was thinking especially of you, Miranda, former criminology. Is that right? Rebecca. Yeah. But you had said that too. I can't remember who said what. Of like, figure out who I am and what do I want from this experience. I think you said that, Miranda. Like, excuse me, but no, duh. Like that. Like, that's like the most fundamental concept in educational theory, is that you don't just, this famous expression, spray and pray. You don't just hope like heck that what you share with people is going to stick with them, because you have to figure out what your learner's all about. So anyway, that was just my little rant about what the heck is going, well, and it's a question, serious question, what the heck is going wrong that our preceptors don't know that? That's just not normally what they do. And, Angie, you have lots and lots of experience in this too. And I'm aghast. It just makes me sad.
If I can just add on to jump in on that, I don't know if it's a lack of knowing to ask or being uncomfortable with having those discussions with their students, but I found that empowering students to bring these things up is a good way to go if the preceptor doesn't initially ask them, what's their situation like, because sometimes, like, we're not trained to be preceptors, right? We can all kind of look back on our experience and, our first students, we fumbled along and really worked with them to figure out what works. And we kind of look at, well, how were we trained? What do we not want to experience ever again? And we use that as our guide to be a preceptor. So I think our whole goal with this Learning Together series is to highlight these things, and having you all here and sharing your experiences and wanting to learn to be a better preceptor is like the most amazing thing that as a coordinator I can see. So I think we just continue to learn together and do better. And we have these, great students that are now great dietitians and will be soon preceptors that we can all learn from.
That's an excellent point, Megan. I see that Brianne has her hand up, so I want to throw it over to
I know, but I feel like I don't want to interrupt because Megan just summarized it so
great. Yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you. And Krista, I think what you presented really speaks to me, because I have never really worked in what I would call a traditional dietetic role in clinical practice or a lot of one-on-one. And so a lot of the student preceptor experiences I have are exactly what you talked about. They're very project-based. They're a little bit of business. They're a lot of writing. They're kind of, thinking about SEO and marketing and like trying to bring expertise from what I would call other fields into dietetics. And so I loved that we went there today, because I think that's something we don't talk about a lot in the dietetic field, is that there's sort of blurring of lines between areas of expertise now and between fields that dietetics can really benefit from. So just thank you for going there and for sort of sharing your insights, because it's very similar to what I see in my practice. And then the only thing that I find is sometimes students don't expect it. So when I get students, they sometimes say, well, I need to do more nutrition, or I'm nervous that I'm not doing more of what I learned in school as like the patient to patient or client interactions. And I'm trying to support them and saying all these other skills are so valuable for your personal growth and your business that you might end up in, or in various other roles. So again, just any insight that anyone has around that perception and how we can better prepare the students for these placements that are less traditional, I guess. So.
Well, the first thing I think of when you're talking, Brianne, is that and a lot of coordinators are really trying hard to send the right person to that placement. So that's an understanding that that the student knows that it's going to be a little bit different. Some students are so focused on this competency checklist that when they're not meeting them all, they start to panic. And that's, I think, where communication with the coordinator comes in. And so I think if it's something that you're seeing, as is a possible issue, to reach out to the coordinator and just to say, just what do they need to be prepared? They need to understand that they're not, like Krista said, she doesn't do one-on-one counseling. So if I sent a student to her thinking they would do that, they would be disappointed. And or they might be anxious and stressed out that they're not meeting competencies. And so it's really important that we have an idea, an understanding of what the placement will provide. And then we have an understanding of what the student is interested in and what competencies they need. And we have that conversation beforehand to set everyone up for success. Because it can be, this checklist can really take over their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you on that. And then as we get better at our, as preceptors, articulating what our businesses and what our offerings are to students, I think that will help too. So
For
anyway, just
sure.
thank you. Great session today.
Thank you very
I
much.
would just add quickly a plug for Kathy and I's next session in the Learning Together series. So in June, and Kathy, I forget the date we landed on, but if you remember, feel free to step in. But we're going to be introducing the changes to the new competencies and then walking you through an example of how to map out what you currently do to meet the competencies, and then have some brainstorming around the ones that are always challenging, to figure out, what does a student actually need to do to be competent. So Kathy and I will be bringing that to you in June 22nd.
22nd. Stay tuned for your invite. Awesome. Thank you so much. If there's any other questions, a little bit over time.
Oh, we're over time.
Kathy. No, go ahead, Kathy.
I think this is directed at Krista, but maybe others. I'm thinking Megan, you might have something to add, and Angie. Is one of the things that I experienced back in the days when I had a private practice, and I will soon again when I retire, is having practicum students come and come and spend time with me, or virtual time, and having them understand the politics of how things get done, that they don't get done like that because you want them to. They take a long time, and that their piece that they might be able to do is super tiny in this grand scheme of things. Do you encounter that, and how do you deal with it? Or how do you work with that situation?
I'm going to generally say we encounter it all the time, especially with population health. But I think, the plan is always to develop a process to have the students, understand that they don't have to do the whole thing in their time frame. But they can actually plan it out, and project planning. I think Miranda talked about that, and so did Rebecca. I think that's really the key. And then that conversation with the preceptor about how it would look if you were here longer, how it would go.
Yeah. And I would just add to that too. I think that's just part of the learning experience, right? Is for them to see that this is the reality of practice, and this is the reality of project-based work. Is it's a process, and sometimes it takes longer than you think it's going to take. This is actually why I do find that the work plan is so helpful in terms of just, mapping out the steps for the student in terms of, okay, here's what we think that is going to be involved in this project. We think that this is going to be step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, but with an understanding that this is if it, things go according to plan, but we're going to have to sort of pivot and shift as time goes on. So yeah, I mean, I think that's just the reality of practice and project-based work, and it's just part of the whole experience. But yeah,
I mean, it's so important to learn, but it's hard to convey, unless you're doing it all the time.
So true. So true.
I'd also add in there that giving a student a mix of a larger project and then smaller projects, so that if they're stuck or they're waiting for you or an external source to provide information to move forward with their larger project, they can move on to these littler projects. And you might have to coach them and say, I'll email you when I can, but if I can't, I'm busy with a client or doing something else. Here's all the other little projects that you can knock off that are pretty independent to be done. So that a lot of times I hear with students, the frustration comes from, I'm waiting for my preceptor to respond. I'm waiting for this person to respond. And I'm just sitting here twiddling my thumbs. So that idle time is what causes the frustration. So if you can fill that with things that they're comfortable doing and that they still feel are rewarding and contributing to their learning, then it'll be a better experience for everyone.
Super great advice. For sure. Okay, we're over time a little bit, but I want to thank everyone for your contributions. Thank our guest speakers today for their great insight. I know that Kathy will be posting this, sending this out, and also going to share the slides, which is fantastic. And thank you all. And I hope to see you on June 22nd for our next Learning Together series. Thank you.